Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Laura Hammond, and I am the Director of the Language Program Office at the UW-Madison. It is my great pleasure to welcome you back to the 2023 Lichtel Career Fair for our third and last panel session of the WISLI Professional Development Series titled Opportunities in Human Services for Learners and Users of Less Commonly Taught Languages. This is a brand new panel this year, and it extends the conversation to consider humanitarian work, social justice, human services, and human resources. This professional development series is organized by the Language Program Office and WISLI and is made possible through the generous support of the Institute for Regional and International Studies, IRIS, National Resource Center, and sponsored by UW-Madison Area Studies and National Resource Centers, UW-Madison partners, and statewide partners. Now in its fourth year, the Lichtel Career Fair connects speakers of less commonly taught languages with leaders and experts who share personal stories and professional advice about cultivating and living a multilingual professional life. And today we're delighted to have many UW alumni and employees with us on this panel. The key message is that learning less commonly taught languages can open doors and elevate opportunities. Another expansion of the Lichtel Career Fair this year is an in-person interactive workshop facilitated by Lydia Odegaard, Language Direction Specialist of the UW-Madison Language Institute. The workshop is tomorrow, July 29th at 9:45 a.m. Central Time and is in person, and there are just a few remaining seats available. If you are a WISLI student looking to further explore the intersections between multilingual and professional development, please consider registering. Complete details and registration link are available at lichtelcareers.wisc.edu, which will also be put in the chat. For the Q&A, I would now like to introduce you to Carrie Uniel, Project Go Administrative Director and WISLI Program Coordinator, with her primary focus on the Middle Eastern and Mediterranean Language Institute, MEDLI, and the Intensive Summer Multilanguage Seminar, which we call MULTI. Carrie will keep an eye on the Q&A to facilitate the discussion portion of our programming. Please do submit your questions via the Q&A feature at any point during this program. And finally, I would like to introduce you to our moderator and MC for this panel, Kimberly Harn, Intern Abroad Advisor and Program Manager, UW-Madison International Academic Programs. Take it away, Kimberly.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura, so much for the introduction, and so excited to be with you all today. So I'm going to start by giving a brief introduction to our panelists. They'll say a little bit more about their background and language journeys in our first couple of questions. But let me start with Irfan Kovankaya, who is a Senior Account Executive at Spitfire Strategies. He is a WISLI alum in Turkish and also speaks Arabic as well, and he was the recipient of 2 FLAS awards. Next, we have Dr. Vijay Limaye. He is a senior scientist at the National Resource Defense Council, or NRDC. He's also an adjunct assistant professor at UW-Madison's Department of Population Health Sciences, a UW alum, and he's also a SASLI alum. And we can't turn off the dinging if you're hearing it, but it will stop shortly. Our next panelist is Jzong Thao, who is a Hmong-English interpreter here, translator, and trainer here on campus at Cultural Linguistic Services, which is part of the Office of Human Resources at UW-Madison. He is a UW alum and is bringing a lot of institutional knowledge. He has been in his role since 2005. And our final panelist is Daniel Wieber. He is an Arabic translator, educator, and project coordinator. He is both a UW and WISLI alum for the Arabic language. All right, so we're going to start with a couple of questions that help the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll sort of hear more from them. So at the heart of it, language is about how we build relationships with each other and share our identities with the world and across borders in our personal lives and also in our communities. With that in mind, let's get to know our panelists and their stories. So I'm going to ask the first 2 questions together, and then we'll let each panelist sort of address both of them. So the first piece is if you could introduce yourself and tell us about your work and how less commonly taught languages are a part of your personal and professional life. The second part of that question is then backing up a little bit to walk us through your journey. So what your experiences with language and international education have been and how that sort of has steered your path. It would be great for the audience if you could mention some notable grants, scholarships, or distinctions that have supported your career. So the first part is just a little bit of an introduction about less commonly taught languages, and then about your language and sort of career trajectory. So Irfan, we'll start with you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so definitely two parts there. My name is Irfan. As mentioned, I'm a senior account executive at Spitfire Strategies. That's a lot of words to say. I work in communications, specifically for public interest, meaning nonprofits, sometimes private businesses if they're working on social good campaigns, but some of them you might know, such as ACLU, Ben and Jerry's, among others. But like a lot of other young people, I've done a variety of jobs. So I'm just going to mention some of those in case you all are more interested in those sort of career paths, especially while we're talking about the public interests. Before this, I was working in the affordable housing policy space with a nonprofit, Miami Homes for All. And also, I'm involved in my local community through organizing spaces, and I was formerly part of the Tallahassee squad of Dream Defenders in Florida. And the other part of the language, it was the language learning component. So it's definitely much more personal than professional if it's not obvious by my name. I do have a Turkish background. My dad is Turkish. And although that is the case, it has been a big part of my academic journey. So is that a part of the question that I'll be answering after this? Because you mentioned those two, or should I just go on a long kind
you
of
can just jump into that, talk a little bit about language, international education, and then any of the grant scholarships, those sorts of things that have been part of your journey as well.
Okay, definitely a big one. So my original study of Turkish was actually not so much, my interest in it was not so much about Turkey as much as it was both about Turkey and Syrians. I was in Turkey one summer several years ago. I actually think it's important to mention I did not grow up speaking Turkish. And my interest in language has a lot more to do with community and friendships and relationships, more so than professions. I would always go out to the courts every day in Turkey. If you know about Turkey, you'll know there's a lot of these five-a-side soccer courts, and I'd always go out there every day and I'd play with these kids. Most of them were actually Syrian, and the only way I could really communicate with them after kind of getting my own training in, and then we'd play a little bit, would be through Turkish, the little bit I did know. And that was when I got to know a little bit about their life beyond headlines and such like that, and just actually forming genuine relationships as my language skills got better in my time there, because I was in Turkey for several months at that point, and I only knew a little bit when I started, and obviously toward the end of my journey was a lot more, getting to know people's lives, their journeys, what they've been through a little bit, just but more importantly, just their interest in a day-to-day, what sort of cartoons they like, what do they watch on TV, what music they listen to, things that honestly add up a little bit more toward who we are. So when it comes to Turkish, I was a lot more motivated by that after leaving Turkey, and that's when I started my journey. Ironically, more so with Turkish than Arabic. Arabic didn't stick so much. So I would go on to receive the Foreign Language Area Studies Fellowship, which I studied at, I want to say at the time was aptly. We just had this conversation right before. I think now it's Medley. Studied at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I took classes at my local university. I was a recipient of the Critical Language Scholarship Award, and also did end up, I did not get to participate in Fulbright, but I did become a semifinalist. So I'm happy to talk through any of the students here about applications or anything about that. And right now, my career doesn't involve so much language learning at the job I'm at this moment, but I do think cultural competency, diversity, and understanding of other people carries over into all careers, especially in the public interest and social good.
Thanks so much, Irfan. So Vijay, will jump to you next. And just a reminder for the two-parter, it's sort of introducing how the less commonly taught languages are part of your career and personal and professional life, and then a little bit about the journey.
Okay, cool, great. It's great to follow Irfan because there's some echoes in my story too. So I'm Vijay Limaye. I'm an epidemiologist, a health scientist. I work at the Natural Resources Defense Council, which is a big environmental nonprofit based in New York. I'm actually stationed here in Madison, and I work on kind of research, communications, policy advocacy around climate change as it relates to public health, with a specific focus on South Asia, India specifically, as well as impacts here in the US. And that kind of professional focus really allows me to day-to-day apply the language learning that started back in 2010 for me at UW-Madison in the WISLI program for Hindi. So day-to-day, I work a lot with our new team in India. We just opened an office in Delhi back in January. So we now have official kind of presence in the country, a small team, but growing to about 35 by the end of the year. So I have to manage scientific and technical staff who work on climate change adaptation in India. India is a country on the front lines of the climate crisis, facing intense heat, terrible air pollution for any of you who've been in South Asia, and a bunch of other climate hazards, flooding, drought, kind of everything you hear about climate change in the US is magnified manyfold in South Asia. So I work on trying to protect people from the harms of climate change, and a lot of that work involves communication with government leaders at kind of every level, the national, state, city level, as well as a bunch of on-the-ground partners that we work with. Even with a team of 30 or so, we rely really heavily on community groups to help us do the work that we need to do, help us fundraise, help us get the work out. And so I was just in India in March, using Hindi in ways that I never thought I would back in WISLI. So it's definitely come in handy for me in all sorts of ways, and I think helped to get me this job to begin with. Like Irfan, my kind of family ties brought me to this area of language study. My dad's from India. My mom grew up here in South Central Wisconsin. And I'd heard Hindi and Marathi in my household growing up, but I kind of didn't really feel that attracted to learning the language formally. I remember having opportunities as an undergraduate out in California and just didn't really feel like I could fit it in. Thankfully, little did I know, UW-Madison is home to really world-renowned summer language programs that allowed me to take some time apart from my PhD in epidemiology to actually spend a whole dedicated summer diving into Hindi instruction and getting to know all sorts of interesting people, students here at Madison, but all over the country who came here to kind of get started on that journey. So that was back in 2010. I had such a great summer with the first year of Hindi study that I continued on my own during the academic year and later applied for that FLAFS Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship from the Center for South Asia. Was fortunate to be awarded that fellowship, which allowed me to not only carve out time for continued language studies, so I ended up completing 3 full academic years in total, but also some time for area studies courses to help complement the electives that I was taking as part of my PhD work. So that was really fantastic opportunity for me and really solidified my interest in working in South Asia professionally. After that, I had a bunch of other opportunities that came my way in terms of being able to apply what I learned in Madison in terms of Hindi. I spent a summer at the State Department in the Bureau of Oceans, Environment, and Science, working on international diplomacy issues as they relate to climate and health. Also spent another summer at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. It's a long acronym, basically folks doing earth science research as it relates to climate impacts around the world. So I'd say, generally just being someone who's in STEM and working in a health science field, but really interested in kind of the interplay between social science, humanities, and how it relates to my work. Language study has become, invaluable to what I'm up to every day, and can shed some more light on that and other questions.
And thank you, Vijay. So next we're going to move to Jzong. And again, just a reminder, it's a little bit about just introducing who you are, how your language is a part of your personal and professional life, and then a little bit about your language journey.
Okay. My name is Jzong Thao. My title is interpreter, translator, and trainer. What I do at UW-Madison is provide language service to UW employees. So my background is not in language. Hmong is my native language, so I'm already fluent on it. I had a bachelor in business, but when I graduated, I went to the private sector and found out that it was not exactly what I like to do. Back in high school, when I first came here as a refugee, I already started helping my elders wrote letters back to the refugee camp and fill out other forms. So that just became my passion. And then it was fortunate to me that the company that I work for relocated to Texas. So it gave me opportunity. I said, well, just maybe I should switch to something I like. So then an opportunity came with the Wisconsin Works program, which able-bodied had to find work and work. So they need someone who can provide Hmong language to help the Hmong population to transition to pay employments, and that's how I got into human service. And after we lost the contract there, and the opportunity in UW-Madison came up, so I put my name on, and I was selected. But I think how I got to UW-Madison is, again, the passion that I had been working with the elders population. So that's exactly what they need, someone to help the employees who do not speak English. So
Great, thank you, Jzong. And finally, we'll move to our final panelist, Daniel, for his introduction.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Wieber, and I graduated from UW-Madison in 2015 with a double major in anthropology and what was called Languages and Cultures of Asia at the time. I don't think that exists as a program anymore. And I currently work as a freelance linguist. So I mostly translate written text from Arabic into English, mostly in the fields of sort of internal government documents right now. And also, interestingly enough, on the side, I also do some work in the food and beverage industry, which is a lot of fun. So I get to write about food and read about food all day. I got my MA in translation from UW-Milwaukee in 2018. But my experience in the language industry has sort of been weaving back and forth between education and language services. So I've also taught Arabic for about 7 years. And I still, even though I'm full-time freelance linguist right now, I still have a private network of Arabic students that I tutor. And I started this Arabic journey. I'm not a native speaker of Arabic, if you couldn't tell. I started this Arabic journey at Aptly, similar to Irfan, which is now called Medley. And I had never taken a language class before. This was my first introduction to ever speaking a foreign language. And I went there because I wanted to do some humanitarian work. And I figured, well, if I'm going to do some humanitarian work, I probably want to be able to speak the language of the people I'm working alongside. And since going to Madison and doing aptly, my ideas around humanitarian work have changed quite a bit. And I really just fell in love with the language of Arabic and took as many classes as I could at UW-Madison, and was able to sort of leverage my passion for language to get a couple of scholarships and grants. I think Irfan and I have very similar paths in that way. I got a FLAS for 1 year, also was awarded a CLS scholarship to study abroad in Tangier. I was awarded a LISAR fellowship, which is not something that exists anymore at UW-Madison. I think the Lubar Institute for the Research of Abrahamic Religions, in which I served on a forum of students that participated in guided interfaith dialogue, which really helped with some of the intercultural piece of learning a language. And then after graduating, I went to Lebanon and taught English with an organization called LEAP, Learning for the Empowerment and Advancement of Palestinians, and returned several years after that to serve as leadership as a project coordinator. And LEAP is currently looking for fall applications, shameless plug there. So if you're looking to go to Lebanon and teach English this fall, look up LEAP Palestine, just Google that. And then after returning from Lebanon, after the third or fourth time I went, I ended up working with refugee resettlement agencies here, doing refugee resettlement casework and also offering some linguistic services, which is really what started me out in translation. I was translating some of their cultural orientation materials and leading cultural orientation for limited English proficiency clients, specifically ones that speak Arabic. And after that, after I graduated with my MA, I didn't actually wind up translating right away. I went right into teaching and taught at a public high school for, or a public charter school for 4 years, just teaching Arabic and humanities there. But most of my career choices have had Arabic at the center. So I have chosen to seek out jobs that will allow me to use my Arabic on a daily basis, because I found that at Madison, learning a second language really became a big part of my identity, and really framed the way that I saw the world and framed the way that I thought. And I didn't want to lose that. And so that's sort of been, the North Star on all of my career choices. And working as a full-time linguist now has been an incredible opportunity to just work with the language every single day, and pick apart new linguistic problems, as well as using my language skills to help people build, communicative bridges.
Great, thank you, Daniel. I think as you're noticing across our introductions, some of the commonalities in the ways that language have shaped all of our panelists' professional and personal journeys, and looking forward to hearing more about that. So for these next questions, we'll let the panelists sort of jump in on questions that make sense for them. So we don't need to go necessarily in order, but if it works for people, we could do the same order. Just jump in as it makes sense. So personal and professional development that spans cultures, countries, and languages is not without challenges and even tensions. And I think many of you have signaled to some of those already in your introductions. It takes work. So our next question is, what insights can you share about balancing long-term development in an additional language with your professional and other academic interests? And how have these aspects of your identity been able to complement each other? And how did you make some of those connections? So we'll sort of let whoever wants to start jump in.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course.
I think all of us, or maybe the Wi-Fi, I'm not sure, but
they're beautiful questions, but they're complicated. Say them again. So it was just about, what insights can you share about balancing long-term development in an additional language with your professional and other academic interests, and how do they sort of complement each other, and how did you sort of make that work?
I can give it a stab, just based on the pause. But yeah, so I think it very much does vary by program if you're talking about undergrads specifically. And I think Daniel mentioned some of those programs that are very beneficial if that's sort of what you want to do. Obviously, in my case, I did benefit from the fact that during my undergraduate degree, I did get an international studies one for one of my majors. So that obviously does help a lot. But I will say, I think the best thing I can think of when it comes to during the undergraduate degree is I can just like list off some of the programs that both were beneficial to me as well as beneficial to my peers. That a lot of them, what they'll do is they'll either carve out a summer for you to go learn the language, or on top of that, what can happen is that, for example, for the FLOSS Fellowship, it was incredibly beneficial for me, helping pay my undergraduate degree, because we all know those are not cheap. So that was incredibly beneficial. It actually, not to overshare, but it did happen where I got that at a time where I very much needed that funding. So I'm just going to go list some of these that I wrote down for you all, just because I figured they might be helpful. Obviously, there is Fulbright for once you're graduated, and there's a few different ones of those. There's the research one, as well as the English teaching assistantship. Obviously, it's an opportunity to go abroad and learn a language. I'm not as familiar with Gilman. My little brother got it, but it was the COVID year, so you all know how that went. But Gilman is an opportunity for you to do an internship or learn a language abroad. And I was an alumni of the Critical Language Scholarship Program, so that would be another opportunity to go abroad if you are not in a COVID year and practice a language through that. And when it comes to you, once you get a career, obviously there's those like Daniel who very much like geared the career toward the language, and that's always an obvious one. But depending on where you work, some of your employers may be willing to have a professional development budget or things like that. That's a very big option for a lot of folks who want to continue that. One thing that I wish I was actually had done better was be a little bit more proactive in my professional journey to maintain that language learning piece and keep on learning. But there is different options of professional development, different fellowships you can get during your undergraduate career and immediately following that can kind of keep you involved. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, the biggest thing to do is build community with the people who speak the language you want to learn, because you can study in the classroom, but obviously there's the cultural piece and the practicing piece. But most importantly, language is a bridge to understand the world we live in. So based on that, what's the point of learning language if you're not using that to connect with other people? And you can learn so much and just improve your quality of life, frankly.
Right, and I want to add to what Ivan said. Understand the culture, the community is really important too. For me, when I first started, I was young. There are a lot of things that I didn't fully know. So socialize with the community, the older people, you get to learn new terminology that when you're young, you probably didn't hear, how they socialize, how they talk to each other. Those are things that um, I learned to help myself do my job better when I work with the people.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think the community for me, I'm still like in touch with a bunch of people that I, did my language study with. I think, big picture wise, if you're learning any foreign language in America, that sets you apart. And if you're learning a less commonly taught language, if you think about, just like the competitive market for graduate schools, for professional schools, for professional placements, you're already in a great position if you take advantage of that opportunity to really kind of expand your horizons and take advantage of, like kind of Irfan said, integrating foreign language into your kind of plan. And I didn't even realize that it could help to pay for my graduate degree, right? And it ended up being a big help for a whole year of study for me. So I think, don't be afraid to explore those opportunities and be open-minded about the doors that it can open beyond just like kind of the classroom experience.
Yeah, that community piece is so huge. I don't think that ever once listing that I was a FLAS recipient on my resume has trumped knowing someone from a community that can connect me with a particular resource or a particular job. I don't think that, yeah, ever once that would override. I think if you take these opportunities, make a concerted effort to build those relationships and cultivate those relationships over time, because those are going to be what helps you find your trajectory, rather than sort of the title of critical language scholar or FLAS fellow or something like that.
Okay, great. So that question, all of you actually touched on a lot of the ways that your language study and your work has been supported by specific grants and scholarships and community resources. So let's sort of turn to some practical advice for a lot of our audience. What strategies and resources should learners and speakers of less commonly taught languages know about when researching and identifying different opportunities, whether volunteer, internship, or employment opportunities that they're looking for? And how do people come into opportunities and roles that integrate a less commonly taught language? I think you touched a little bit on the last question already, but just really focusing on strategies for finding some of the volunteer, employment, internship type opportunities where they're using their language skills. You are muted, Irfan, if you're talking.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that, y'all. It doesn't matter how many years, I'm always going to do that. But honestly, the most obvious answer is right in front of you all. I'm sure everybody here is happy to be a resource to any undergraduate students who reach out. I do know our LinkedIns are linked to the event. Happy to share my email, and perhaps others are as well. But that also comes into the next aspect of that, which is, I would say, talk to alumni definitely of all these programs, especially for a lot of college students, possibly like low income students, people of color, first gen folks. I think a lot of the classical language learning elements that will pay for it are not always known. Sometimes your guidance office or something like that may know the answer, but many of them I did not know about until I actually met people very coincidentally who knew about a lot of these programs, which are really great and I think do provide a lot of access because of the funding for students who may not be usually able to take certain classes or get certain opportunities. But there are these funding opportunities out there. So I would say definitely when it comes to that, talking to alumni, possibly your guidance office, talking to us, frankly, we just want to be a resource to all of you, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that UW-Madison does a really great job of marketing the opportunities that are available. So, just keep an eye on your email and keep an eye on the communications that are going out. And I'm going to say something that sounds really corporate for a human services panel, but in translation, or in the translation industry, we use this term passive marketing. I'm sure that other industries use this as well. Because like Irfan said, I did not know about a lot of these opportunities. I learned about them through people. And I learned about them a lot of the time through professors, because what I would do is I was really, really passionate about Arabic. I made it known that I was pretty obsessed with this language. I started clubs, we held culture events, I sort of unintentionally through my passion for Arabic created this persona of, oh, that's the Arabic guy. And so when opportunities came up, professors would email me and be like, hey, you should apply for this and I'll write you a letter of rec and, hopefully you'll get it. So, really, it's not the only way. You should still go out and look for opportunities. But if you really dedicate yourself to your language studies and people see that, opportunities may also come to you.
That's actually funny that you, oh, sorry. Oh, I was just gonna say, that's actually funny that you mentioned that, because for FLOSS, I was also emailed by a professor and was not planning on applying at all. But
yeah, I was just gonna say, don't be afraid to kind of, elevate your language skills, even if you aren't asked, right? Like in this country, people may just not even ask about it because of our culture of kind of exceptionalism that drives people away from foreign language learning, unfortunately. So, tell people about your language learning skills, and also tell people about everything that comes along with that, the risk taking, the problem solving, the patience that you've demonstrated in sticking with something for a while, being creative, working with teams, being a leader, like all of that is coming into play in your classroom experience and in your individual studies. But people don't always think to call out those skills that they're honing day to day because they're focused on, the verb tense and the vocab rather than the big picture stuff. So I'd encourage you to, think about how you've grown through language study too.
Right, and I want to add to what Daniel said earlier. The compassionate you have about that particular language, you have to stress that too, because their opposition that there are a lot of applicants apply for, but they really look for some minor detail when they decide who to hire. So you have to know yourself and promote or market those skills.
All right, so some students in our audience might question whether their language abilities are strong enough to be used professionally, which I think is a doubt that probably many of us in the room have faced. So if you could talk a little bit about, have you ever experienced linguistic imposter syndrome? And what is your advice for young language learners who may be wondering whether their language abilities are ready to access the sorts of communities they hope to serve?
I would say that don't be afraid to make mistakes. When you try to use a different language, there will always be people laughing at you, but don't be afraid about it. You will learn from it, and just be honest. Let people know that, okay, I might not be really fluent on this area. Correct me. And just be open. I think your social skill is something that can help you improve those skills too. So
yeah, totally. I still feel like this a lot of times, and I think the humility that you unlock when you attempt things, and of course, like the best learning is all about trying it out, right, and being open to feedback. Through language learning, have become a lot more comfortable with not taking it personally, right? Like no one's going to speak something 100% perfect from day one, and I think the attempt and the effort that you demonstrate, especially while you're traveling, I've never had a negative experience with that, only positive.
Yeah, even working as a full-time linguist and engaging with the language every single day, I still run into sort of imposter syndrome all the time. And it takes a community to remind me that no, actually you are an Arabic speaker. You do speak this language. You're speaking to me in it right now. In fact, so I think it's important also to remember that there's just like there's a large spectrum of language proficiencies beyond what ACTFL and beyond what any institution will tell you. There's also a huge spectrum of jobs that require different levels of language. So, am I going to go translate, an 80-page legal text tomorrow? No. But am I going to translate a food blog? Yeah, that's something I can handle. Or am I, you become familiar with different sort of fields within your language. So I cannot talk about, aerospace engineering in English or in Arabic, but I can, use a number of government terms that would serve a certain client or a certain, target market. So I would not get caught up in language imposter syndrome. And I would recognize that wherever you are in your language learning journey, there's going to be something that you can do with it, whether that's having a conversation with a friend or whether that is, translating chemical engineering.
Sorry, keep going.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to actually say on this specific question, I should probably defer to my colleagues on that one who do use their language a little bit more regularly for their job. I will say partially maybe one of the reasons I don't use my language now for mine is because of that. But there was a specific instance a few months ago or so when I was working in housing. Actually, it was really random. I got an email from a shelter because I had a friend who worked there who they only spoke Turkish, and they were in Miami-Dade of all places. So if you know Miami, it's Spanish, Haitian, and English, obviously. So it was the most random situation where nobody was there that could communicate kind of their options in the housing system. And then we emailed back and forth in Turkish, obviously. And I want to say we spoke on the phone a little bit about the different options. And you probably know more than you think, is what I will say.
Right. And I also want to say it out that even I've been doing this job for 18 years, there's still sometimes whether I'm interpreting or translating, there are things that I did it and then I come back to look at and I say, oh, it's better to phrase it this way. Or if I'm interpreting after that meeting, I'll say, oh, it will probably be better to interpret this way next time. So there's always things that you learn along the way. So.
Isham, that was the perfect transition to the next question. So the next question asks us for you all to talk a little bit about some of the other benefits beyond speaking proficiency to learning a language. So specifically, what skills other than language proficiency are most relevant to the work or best complement your multilingual talent? And how did you develop those skills that complement your language skills?
I think for me, I mentioned a bunch of kind of the other skills that you're honing in the classroom experience. I think, big picture is that language learning is, about the nuts and bolts of grammar and vocab, but it's really a window into another culture and another perspective. And that's been profoundly helpful for me in my professional collaborations, in understanding how to approach, different collaborators, different audiences. the pitfalls, the best practices, all of that is kind of like intangible learning that you pick up without even knowing it, right? And so to me, that's been really helpful, is just to appreciate kind of the cultural context that the language learning happens within. And also to see, like, even other people that you're studying the language with, they're probably interested in all sorts of different subject matter areas, other majors or whatever that are different from yours. And I think being open to kind of how those different perspectives, even amongst like fellow language learners, can inform your own is really healthy and good for growth.
Yeah, I would say that there's lots of research out there about, that employers want employees with cultural competence, and that's what they look for in language learners. And there's, all this new cognitive research out there about how it helps your brain to learn a language. And we could quote that all day, but I think one of the most important things for me is the way that learning a second language can frame your perspectives on things and sort of channel narratives that come from different languages. This is especially important to me in humanitarian work. For example, I was on this conference call with a bunch of Palestinian solidarity activists at the end of 2022, and they were just sort of reviewing the year in Palestinian solidarity, wins and major events. But the conference call was in Arabic. And someone chimed in, a woman chimed in and said, "I'm really glad that we are speaking in Arabic right now, because though many of us may be able to speak, many of us are in diaspora, some of us are in Gaza, some of us in the West Bank, many of us can speak English, but when we talk about this in English, it opens up the opportunity for all these problematic narratives about Palestinians. And like a white savior complex, or that, Palestinians are, victims that aren't actually doing any of the work on the ground, and we need to help them." And she was like, "I'm really thankful that in this space, because of the language we're using, we're able to sort of disrupt those narratives or shut the doors off to those narratives." And for me, that was like a profound moment of like, this is one of the reasons that I like to participate in certain things in a second language, because it does really shift the perspective and channel those narratives.
That is such an impactful point. Thank you for that, Daniel. And it's great to hear. Wow, yeah, thank you for that. When it comes to also bringing that conversation, obviously in movement spaces, language is huge, and especially depending on what language. For example, like if I'm talking about Turkish, obviously, because that was the language I took, Kurdish is so big within the Turkish political space and important to speak, just given the fact that it was outlawed for so many years and so forth. And there's different languages, there's always a politics to that, given that English is the dominant language. It is a lingua franca. There is certain power in that when we're talking about movements. But me going back to this actually a little bit, just because I thought that was important to say, there's also no reason that that kind of cultural competency you get from the international space can't be applied to the domestic one, because obviously there are, the languages that we're talking about in these cases, like Spanish or Haitian or things like that. Yeah, they're commonly known, but the understanding of other people, that kind of like diversity, equity, inclusion, sort of DEI work and so forth. Honestly, I think what undergirds all of that is humility. And when you are speaking in a language that is not your own, and when you have to internalize that, and for the first time as native English speakers, we do not have that linguistic advantage. I remember I argue with my mom, she's Taiwanese sometimes, and I distinctly remember when I was younger, she would always say, "You're wrong, I just can't say in English. You're so wrong, and you're back talking. I just can't say it to you right now. You're wrong, but I'm not continuing this anymore." And I remember at that, when I was 10, 12, I really I was feeling myself. I was like, yeah, I'm right. It's actually because I'm right. But actually, as an adult now, I do not think I could. She was right. I was wrong on that specific topic, and she was most definitely right regarding the language ability. So obviously it teaches you humility, and also I think it's for the first time, even if we talk about social justice concepts and these sort of things in English, it's very different and even if we try to actively avoid that sort of white savior complex, it becomes very different when we talk about it in different languages, because even speaking English, it reaffirms that. And one, obviously gives certain folks an advantage in kind of dialogue, but two, it's certain concepts and phrases and ways of looking at the world, they're a lot easier to tap into when you're speaking the language that you're talking about in that moment. The ideas and thoughts, like people always say, you think differently in your second language, but it very much is true.
All right, I'm just keeping an eye on the clock, and we have 2 more questions. So, and we want to leave a little bit of time for questions. It's important to have an understanding of your knowledge as an additional language in terms of ability and proficiency, as many of you have already mentioned, and how it relates to your entire skill set. Any skilled career advisor will never underestimate the power of networking and how that sort of can shape your professional trajectory. So knowing that we've talked a little bit about this, what networking strategies have you found to be effective? And what's been a successful example of networking that's provided you or a colleague with an opportunity to use a language or multilingualism in their context? So again, networking strategies are an example of a successful time that you have been able to get something with using those networking skills.
To me, when I was working in the private sector, I volunteer in community organizations to keep my language going and learning. So that is always important, I think, for the student who are still at school. There are a lot of, it doesn't matter what language you are studying right now, there are community agency that might provide that service to, might not be a big population, might be only few, but your language can be really helpful for the organization. So reaching out to them will be good. And language positions, sometimes you have to create it too. For me, I always feel like, okay, I need this a need with this agency, need this language skill, but once you get in there, they might not be able to offer you like full time, but you have to be able to identify, okay, what are the areas that you can talk to them and add those services, so it become a full-time position for you too. So
Yeah, that's good advice. I think for me, trying to think a little bit like ahead of job interviews, for example, about the ways that my language skills might be applicable to the job that I'm seeking, even if they haven't come up in the job description. Just like, thinking a little bit ahead of time about how you can bring, your unique abilities, which, are going to set you apart from the rest of the pack. But thinking about how to apply those. Like, it's one thing to say, oh, I speak XYZ language, but it's another thing to say, hey, I have some confidence here, and this is how I could help advance the mission here. And have you thought about this? So I know when I'm interviewing candidates now, on the other side of the fence, that is like a big, positive sign in a candidate if they can demonstrate the ability to kind of translate, for lack of a better word, their skills into like the applied space of professional work.
Yeah, so when it comes to networking, I think the obvious comes to my mind is, depending on what events you're at, just I think, especially with a lesser commonly taught language, people do tend to be very happy when you speak in their language, or if you two are, maybe even if it's not your first language, if you two kind of have that commonality, it's nice. It definitely rubs people in a positive way, I would say, when you're able to just pull that out and have a short little conversation. I think it creates that connection. Also, when it comes to some of these programs, a lot of them are networks in many ways with alumni. So I would definitely tap into that. Obviously, you know, now I know these three wonderful individuals, albeit only through Zoom, but and there's folks at University of Wisconsin-Madison. So depending on the program, I would definitely tap into those alumni networks, people who have that shared experience as you when it comes to networking. Obviously, there's that. There's the language community itself. There's talking to folks with similar experiences. Definitely tap into that because I am somebody who personally hates networking. It's not really my thing. I don't like it. I don't like small talk. I like to actually make friends if I have to. So I think it's one of those things that this is going to sound really weird, but don't always lead in with the job or the thing you want, but so much more about the connection and commonalities you have, which in this case happen to be from the language.
Yeah, that resonates with me, Irfan. I also hate networking, but stepping into a freelance position, I had to deal with all these sort of buzzwords that I found were very, you know, sort of repulsive to me. Networking, marketing, branding, these things I really had to lean into. And through doing that, I've sort of reframed how I see networking. It's not always this sort of corporate goal. Like you go into a conversation with a goal, you're trying to land a job, like exactly like you said, Irfan. It's about making these like real human connections with people and really, you know, like a lot of what I do is on LinkedIn, and I don't message people and say, you know, hi, how are you? Do you have a job for me? Or hi, how are you? I need help with this translation. I ask about their work. I read what they've done. And I do end up, I have through LinkedIn and Pros and some of these other digital communities, I've made, you know, really strong friendships with people that are also translators. You know, I guess I'm just sort of rephrasing a lot of what Irfan said, but yeah, knowing that your background in language learning is that connection is a really good place to start, I would say.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So Carrie, I am going to turn it over to you for our Q&A portion. So Carrie's going to grab some of the questions from the chat and sort of synthesize them for our panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Kimberly, and thank you, panelists. Before just hopping over to the questions section for a few more minutes that we have left during this panel, I did just want to let our WISLI students know that next week we will have an informal student-led writing workshop that is focusing on applications to major language awards, like some of the ones that have been mentioned in this panel, including CLS, Critical Language Scholarship, the Gilman Scholarship, the Boren Award, and the Foreign Language and Area Studies Award, or FLAS. This workshop will discuss strategies to plan essays and ways to connect language study to academic or career plans. This event will be held from 2 to 3 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday, August 2nd in Ingram 122. In addition, after that, WISLI students can learn about the Critical Language Scholarship in an informal information session that will be from 3:30 to 4:30 on Wednesday, August 2nd, again in Ingram 122. And it'll discuss the program, eligibility, language offerings, and more. So hope to see many of you there. And it's going to be the student portion led by a Medley student. And it's great as well to see so many Apley or Medley alumni on this panel. And just checking the questions here, I'm going to combine quite a few as we have some great questions here. But since we have some questions geared towards translation and interpretation, I did just want to ask the panel, mainly Daniel and John, and if anyone else has experience in this, how do the panelists narrow in on which dialect of the language, or maybe how they specialize or choose to specialize in which dialect or regional language that they would like to pursue, and how they go about the process of finding translation or interpretation work?
In Hmong language, there are only 2 dialects for the people who are here. So I know which dialect has more population. I know in Madison here, the white dialect is more common. In other city like Milwaukee and Warsaw, the green dialects it's more common. So when I translate into white dialect. Interpretation, um, either language I can do it too. I understand I might not be able to speak that well in the green dialect, but if they speak green dialect to me, I understand. So um, the translation is more what I have to decide based on the number of employees speak what language, what dialects.
Yeah, I think that selecting a dialect, I didn't really pick one consciously. I worked in Lebanon and I shared an office with people from Syria for a number of years. So that's sort of the Levantine dialect I was fated to learn the Levantine dialect along with MSA or Modern Standard Arabic. So that just might be how it works out for you. You might get a CLS and then you might not get to pick exactly which country you go to. And that might be the dialect that you end up specializing in. You could try to do market research and see what dialect is most common in the fields that you want to work in. But in terms of finding translation work, the best two websites I can mention right now are getonprose.com, P-R-O-Z. That is where you will find a lot of work. And a lot of that is better through passive marketing. So applying for jobs on there is not a great idea. It sometimes works out, but the rates are awful. And then also LinkedIn is another huge, if you ask translators that have been in the business for 10 years, which one's better, most people say they actually find more work through LinkedIn. And again, it's about building that online presence, that persona, and making sure people know what you specialize in and what kind of services you can offer beyond just translating, because nowadays we're competing with a lot of technology. So what more can you offer than a machine can is what I would say.
Great, thank you so much. And I think we have time for maybe one more question. So I'm going to select a question that is a bit more wide-ranging and talking about to your futures, or thinking about your past selves to better mentor future students. Can the speakers share any advice, strengths and weaknesses, triumphs and pitfalls for their younger selves that students that can share that share that positionality can benefit from? So basically, thinking about yourself back when you were learning language and some tips and tricks for future language learners.
I'd say take advantage of language learning as soon as possible in your educational journey. I started Hindi at 26, and people who were just a few years younger than me, I could see them picking up quite a bit faster. And maybe that's not true for everybody, but I think, I guess big picture, language learning can be seen as like a side project, or it can be seen as the main, part and complementary key part of your core trajectory. And I think the latter approach, where you really integrate it and don't see it as something that can wait or something that's kind of an add-on, but really something that's core to your learning, to me, that has huge benefit.
I would think of more of the structure and process of how to learn a language, and the sense of literally breaking it down. Like, I need practicing. I know these words. I need to put them into sentences, and literally being intentional in that way, and being intentional about specifically, I'm bad at this sort of type of sentence and grammatical way, and practicing using that in conversation specifically, being very intentional, almost like a sport, breaking down the part of the game that you're not as good at and getting reps in that. And also, it's not calc, it's not your other classes, it's not your history class. You got to do it every day. You can't cram that. You can maybe get okay on the exams like that, but you'll never learn it if you don't do it daily, which might make it seem really hard. But at the same time, the flip advice is that at the same time, it's a lot easier than you think. So I wouldn't get overwhelmed by it. I would just do it daily, work on the things that you're a little bit bad at once you're at that more advanced level. And it's a lot easier than you think. Don't get overwhelmed by just how big the task seems. If you do it, you'll get there.
Yeah, I would say practice using it is something that really important. In our language, I know even my kids, sometimes they talk to me, say we, and we have like V2, V3, and sometimes it's only her and her friends, but she say we. I say we. Who else with you? We mean more than two. It's not just the two of you. In our language, it's different than English, so you have to know the proper words to use.
Yeah, I would just add that like community is key, I think, in language learning. You know, you don't use a language in a vacuum, and you're not going to learn a language in a vacuum. So like sitting in your dorm room or in your apartment and going through flashcards can be good, but really get out there, try to connect with some native speakers like as soon as you can, not after you graduate. Find communities where people want to speak this language, whether they are native speakers or whether they're fellow language learners, and you know, try to make language learning a community event, and you're going to pick it up a lot faster. You're going to build some of those long-term relationships and connections, and it'll go a lot further than trying to do it alone.
Yeah, and it's just like our native language. If you look back when you're young and now, when you graduate from college, if you hang out with a group of old guys, there are things that they talk that you probably don't understand. So same thing, you're learning a new language, you have to get used to that and learn okay, they are talking about different things, or when they're saying this, it means this. So um, so practice and community, like Daniel said.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists for this very rich conversation. So rich, we even went over by 2 minutes, which we will live with. I just want to give a quick shout out. My day job is I work in the intern abroad office, which is on the 3rd floor of BASCA. I'm part of the study abroad office here on campus. So for any UW students who want to use their language skills while also building professional skills, please come find me outside of sort of during the semester or whenever, when you want to think about that. Finally, a reminder to WISLI students that you have another professional development workshop tomorrow with the wonderful Lydia Odegaard. So thank you again so much to the panelists and for the organizers, and wishing everyone a wonderful holiday. It's very hot here in Madison if you are not here, so stay cool.